Hey everyone, welcome to our next video in Learning to Moodle. This video we are going to dive into the creating of an assignment as well as the settings, the most common settings used when administering an assignment. So here I am in a blank course. I've showed you before when you turn the editing on, you will get an activity chooser, and I'm going to turn on the other activity chooser. We are just going to go down into week one. I've got nothing in here, and I am going to add an activity, just the most basic of assignments. The assignment is typically, well, the icon kind of gives you a hint. It's something that the students are going to hand in. This gives them a place to turn in that assignment digitally, and most of the assignments in this case end up being either a PowerPoint presentation or a paper or an image or some kind of file that they've created and are about to turn in. Every assignment needs a name, so I'm just going to call this one a sample paper. The description, it is important. It says you can display this on the page. I find that a description is better left off of the main page of Moodle to help keep that to be a little bit cleaner look for people, but the description is usually what I would consider to be the instructions for the assignment. So I am actually going to go over to one of my other courses here and grab an assignment. Alright, so I've copied some instructions. I'm just going to paste those instructions here. These are what the students are going to see when they click on the assignment. Because you can put a lot more detail here, I really recommend when we talk about the steps to completion for each week, that the steps to completion might be submit the sample paper. Nothing else. The actual instructions for the assignment would show up here to kind of keep them in one place, as well as be a little bit more detailed and keep the steps to completion from becoming overwhelming. Alright, so the most common features whenever you're creating and working within Moodle, you have the ability to add all kinds of things to the actual editor area. You'll notice down in the right hand side I've got the ability to make this a little bit bigger if I want to see it. The most common things are being able to make things bold, which I don't feel in Moodle really makes it look all that different. I just hit Control Z to undo that. You can also do things like change the color of the font if you needed to make something stand out, or highlight the font using the highlighter there again for standing out. You can make bulleted lists and numbered lists just like you can with other things, as well as add images, the indenting, the subscript and superscript, all of those different types of things. The one reason I point this out is a lot of times people want to embed a YouTube video or any kind of content. Using this first thing opens up extra options, and then the HTML kind of shows the code for that. So a lot of times, like a YouTube video, you would be able to go, and I'll just grab one as an example. Go over to youtube.com and we will take one of these videos then to share it. So here's Shaq and Charles Barkley. We'll pause that. We'll hit the share button and we will embed this video. And this is the type of code that we're talking about, being able to copy that code. I'm just going to go to the very end and paste the code here. I'm going to turn off the HTML display and you'll see the YouTube video. So really helpful to understand how the editor works, and we'll probably go through some more of those features in detail, but that's the most common one that people ask. Alright, additional files. If I wanted to put the instructions, and a lot of times people want to print these out, they could print them out off their page, but I find it helpful to have whether it's a PDF or a Word document. So let's just go into PDFs and we'll grab PDF and we'll pull it over there. This is going to show up as a file for the students to download. Also helpful if there's some kind of template that you want the students to use, you can put that file in the additional files area. It will be available to students. The next section here talks about the availability. Personally, I am not a fan of the first and last, allow submissions from, and the cutoff dates. The main reason for that is that a lot of times my personal philosophy is even if someone does something late, I still need to have that turned in before I would give them credit for the class. And I also don't like using the allow submissions from, because it's real easy to forget or have the wrong date on there. So I typically reveal the assignment using the hide and show that was done before when I'm ready for students to start submitting those things. The only reason I would ever use this is if I opened the entire course up at once, but I didn't want students working ahead or turning something in. But I kind of think that these are more trouble than they're worth. The due date is nice. It's not necessary. The due date's nice simply because it will mark the assignment as on time or late for you when you go to correct it and download all the submissions. It also helps students see, like, oh, here's the due date. The only trouble with it is that you have to remember every time you do your class, you're going to need to go through every assignment and make sure that the due date has been changed. Otherwise, you can use it or not use it. Submission types. When you are asking students to complete the assignment, most of the time people are using file submissions. They're like, I'm just going to have them turn in a paper. I recommend giving them more than one, not attempt, but letting them turn in more than one file for a lot of reasons. Mainly just because if they accidentally turn in the wrong file, you don't have to go and reopen the assignment for them. So I usually give them a number of uploads, and I always change this to be as large as possible. 64 megabytes is plenty big for most documents and PDFs. Where you're going to run into trouble is if you are asking students to do PowerPoint presentations that have either a lot of images or have a voiceover on it. As a result, there are different tools that I recommend using to do online presentations or to record them and to use something like YouTube to deliver that video content to the instructor. Those are the most common things, and those are the ones that are open right away. Feedback types, I don't really mess around with any of these very often. The one that I wish was kind of on by default is feedback files. That allows you as an instructor, if you want to write up all of your comments into a Word file and just give that file to a student, you can submit a file back to the student. So I tend to use that. Feedback comments I always keep on. I don't use the offline grading worksheet. Quite honestly, I'm not exactly sure how that one works yet, and I haven't heard any requests for it. I'll go down through all of these. The submission settings, the important part is I don't require students to click the submit button. That doesn't mean that they don't click it the first time, and I'll open up this, but if you put this on, when a student turns in an assignment, they're going to drop it in there and hit submit, which is fine. The assignment's uploaded. This requires them to hit a submit button a second time, basically saying this assignment is done. It's handy if you are really going to have students do drafts of something. You can say, here, turn it in. That way it's on there. I can go in and see it, but it's going to be marked as a draft. When you are finished, you have to go back and hit submit. I personally have found that can become confusing for students and not realizing that they haven't marked something as final. So I usually recommend that you do not turn this on. As far as attempts reopened, I usually put that on manually. Even if you keep it at never, you can always go back and edit that if you need to reopen an attempt. And because of that, the only time I really worry about attempts is if a student is doing a quiz. So it doesn't really apply in this section. I usually just keep all of these things the way that they're set, no and never. Group submission settings, I'll go through that when we talk about groups. Not a lot of people are using groups in an online course. Maybe in a face-to-face course. Even still, a lot of people will just have each group member submit the assignments individually. Notifications, this is for you as an instructor. You can set this on so that it notifies graders, being you or someone else in your class, when something is submitted. You can turn it on if you want to be notified that something was turned late. And you can have a default setting for after you grade the assignment, whether or not you want it to notify students that the assignment has been graded. And I've seen people use any combination of those. The grade is probably the big one. This is where you change how many points that grade or that assignment is going to be worth. Usually I recommend that you make this match whatever your rubric says. If you see your rubric says this is going to be a 12-point rubric, make it a 12-point assignment. You can always weight assignments differently, but I really stress that people try to keep their assignment point values the same as whatever their rubric is and just use a straight up point method rather than get too far into weighting, because it's more transparent. But you can weight assignments using categories, and we'll talk about that in the gradebook later. If you have categories set up, you can drop this assignment into a category right away. While I'm in here, I'll point out that there are scales, but they are a little tricky to set up. And so I recommend not using any of the scales. Quite honestly, I don't know what these first 4 scales actually are. Or you can set something to have no grade whatsoever. But most common is points. Set how many points you're going to work through. We'll have another video that talks about the different types of grading. The most common other method for grading is a rubric. It takes a little bit of work to get the rubric set up, but once you have it set up, it's a really handy way to grade assignments and give consistent feedback without having to grade it on a rubric separately and then attach it as a file. So a really handy way. We'll have a video about rubrics as well. I don't use any of these things, quite honestly, not sure exactly how the grading workflow works. I also never mark the grade to pass. We give grades whether or not, you have to get a B on an assignment. All of those things we just take care of as we grade the students in the gradebook. Common module settings, whether or not this is hidden or shown, this is the same setting that you see on the front page. And I usually recommend putting it as no groups. If you put it as visible groups or separate groups, it can cause problems with whether or not students can see it if you have not assigned groups in your class. Restrict access, this is actually something we can go through as well if you're trying to set up things where your students don't have access to something until a certain date or until they've completed another assignment or gotten a certain score on a quiz. Those are all the types of restrictions that would keep them from opening this assignment. And the last one is activity completion. I strongly recommend that you don't use the activity completion unless you are going to go through your entire course and get everything set up, because it really clutters up the main page and isn't always as useful as people think it is. It's really just a way for students to mark things that they've done. And so by default, assignments really have no activity completion, and I'd recommend keeping it that way. We will go through this in a separate video, but that is the overview or the kind of detailed description of all of the things that you have in the assignment. So I'm going to save this assignment and display it, and you'll see this is what it would look like really to a student as well. They don't have the view grade all submissions down here like an instructor does. Instructor has a very easy way of seeing like, oh, I have 3 students, no one has submitted yet, and no one needs grading. Students would actually just have a drop box or a text box here if that's the type of submission you're asking for. But there's the instructions, there's a little video. Students would be able to come in and do that. And I'll actually switch the role to a student so you can see when a student comes in for this one, it has all of the things. It tells them that they haven't submitted it, they haven't graded, there's no comments from the teacher about their submission. They can go ahead and add a submission, and it gives them the little drop box for it. The last thing then with the assignment is, and I'll return to my normal role, and I'll go back into the edit settings. Once assignment is created, if I come into the assignment and go to the edit settings for the assignment, it is the exact same settings that were there when I created the assignment. I wanted to point out one other one. Under submission types, online text is also pretty useful if you just want them to share a link to something like a Google slide or a YouTube video, or even if it's just a short essay that's just a paragraph or so long, you might just say, I just want them to type it in right here. That's not bad. Some people even use the word limit, like it has to be under a certain amount, a certain number of words in order for it to be submitted. But I usually, most of the things are file submissions or online text. Very rarely do I have something that involves both. But a lot of times I leave both of them open and just leave it up to students how they want to turn something in. So There's all of those settings, and just to see what the textbook looks like, I'll switch my role to a student. And now when I add a submission, I have a place to enter online text and a place to drop a file. So that is the basics for assignments. In one of our next videos, we will take a look at the grade settings and the gradebook setup for such an assignment.